A lot of people are frightened about being listened to, and last year or the year before in Devon and Cornwall police area, they had intercepted 53,000 telephone calls and emails. I hope many of those were mine. We shouldn't be frightened of talking, all right? The way the systems work, automatic voice recognition, it can tell me, it can tell you by your voice, and they will pick up on keywords. And the machines start running, and they can monitor millions of calls per hour. But once you've monitored millions of calls per hour and you're left with hundreds of thousands of selected calls, they've got to go through a screening process, and the screening process is done by people. Okay? And the people are ordinary people. They're youngsters, 25, 26 years old, who believe they've got a very important job in GCHQ or MI5, and they're saving the country. But of course, what they're also doing by listening to our conversations is learning that what's happening in the country isn't quite as straightforward as it should be. And one of the golden rules of dictatorships is that when they finally establish themselves, they murder and dispose of all the people who know too much. So when we are having telephone calls, we regularly speak to the operators the other end, suggesting they need to wake up because they're going to be dispatched. Yeah? So it's not a question of talking less. We want more people to talk more, a lot more. Because if we end up with our million people sending out 100 emails and telephone calls per day, the people listening in have got a big problem. And if you want to get rid of the surveillance state, you swamp it. You don't hide, you swamp it. That is a simple fact and tactic, okay? So don't be frightened. Talk to people, tell them what you're doing, what you want to do. But the only thing I would suggest is you don't necessarily need to say when you're going to do something or how you're going to do it. So you might be very happy to discuss a whole lot of things, but no, I'm not going to tell them I'm going to do that Tuesday next week. I'll do that when I meet face to face. The groups that are set up across the country, we don't want to know who your contacts are. All right? I operate with a whole load of groups. I don't ask them who their contacts are. I don't want to know. I don't need to know. But you need one person to be talking with other people, okay? But imagine it as a resistance movement with little cells. Nobody's in overall control of the cells. The cells know cells close to them, but they don't necessarily know who's running the one down the road in Bristol. Keep it loose. Don't try and control people. Be nice to people. Who joins the network and stays? The person that you know as a person. So if they say they can't do anything next week because their mum-in-law's very ill, you need to be phoning them at some stage asking how the mum-in-law is, because that is how you build trust with people. So it's all to do with cells, and it's all to do with just keeping your business to yourself. If somebody comes along and asks too many questions, they may be inquisitive, they may be a good person, but just be a bit discerning. But don't get in the mentality that you can't talk to other people because they may be on the other side. All that does is draws you into a sort of goldfish bowl. All right? So the Marxist ideology captures our mind, labels people, turns people against each other, makes friction, angst, fear. So we've got to turn it back the other way. We've got to treat people as human beings. Common purpose people and many other people in the public sector have received training involving neuro-linguistic programming. I am not saying that everybody who is a neuro-linguistic programmer is a bad person, but think of it like a hypnotist. You can use hypnosis to stop smoking or maybe cure a fear, or the hypnotist can say, well, good morning, Mrs. X, Mr. X, please take your clothes off. NLP in the wrong hands is unbelievably dangerous because you are directly playing around with people's minds And this is why we are now seeing a large number of people, and particularly young people, starting to do weird things, self-harm, and commit suicide. And one of the areas we're very interested in is South Wales, where they're now up to 29 suicides. And I can tell you that some extraordinary things are being discovered there, such as connections between the suicides and fraud and corruption and paedophilia involving the local police force. And the chief constable has recently resigned, a lady called Barbara Wilding. She happens to be a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, if that means anything to you. And she's been closely involved with the local mental health partnership. Now, of course, I would not suggest that she's done anything wrong, merely that we are beginning to start to look at the strange things happening. But if you want to get into the next stage of understanding why you're seeing weird things, why does a policeman say, I can't possibly get on a bike for a photo shoot, which appeared in the papers? Why did a policeman stop a man who was blowing his nose while parked at red lights? He did it because in his mind he believed it was the right thing to do. And the reason he believed it was the right thing to do is because he's been trained to think that way using neurolinguistics, which is subliminal messaging. Can I prove it? Yes, because I've shown documents in all of the talks on common purpose where I have shown and named trainers for the police using neurolinguistics. They are now starting to use it in schools, normally under the title of creative visualization. Anybody who allows themselves to be hypnotized or undergo neurolinguistics runs the risk of an adverse mental effect. A low proportion, 1 or 2, 3%, but if we are now starting to use NLP on hundreds of thousands of young people, you can expect to see the suicide rate increase, which is what you're seeing. I can't tell you any more about this tonight, you've got to dig it out for yourself, but we are seeing people act abnormally because they're being put through courses. David Cameron, since we're on his doorstep, was quoted in the press as saying that he believed that the Tory party needed to take on board psychometric testing. And the reason he's interested in psychometric testing is he can then screen out the people he needs to join the political ideology. If you think I'm joking, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. The people they're looking for are people who are narcissistic. And they particularly want people who have narcissistic personalities to the extent it is a disorder. NPD. And this is why when you start to look at senior politicians, you look at Mandelson, Miliband, Blair, Brown, Cameron, Osborne, to name a few, they appear to be the same type of people. They're very pleased and proud with themselves to the extent they can't even seem to understand why we're upset about expenses. They don't understand how we feel because they're not actually in their right frame of mind. Now, this stuff is real and it's out there on a huge scale, and they're pumping it through the system by networking. Go on the internet, put in neurolinguistic programming, NLP, and you will come up with hundreds of consultancies, many of whom are working directly for the government. Okay? So I don't want to scare you, because your mind runs riot with this stuff, and it's the invasion of the body snatchers. But there are a lot of people out there who are no longer thinking in a normal, rational way. Okay? They are victims. So we don't need to be nasty to them. We need to understand they're there, and it needs to be exposed, and we're going to work on this. Now, the other thing is, and somebody's already asked me this